My name is Fletcher. I'm 31 years old, and I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. I never believed in supernatural things, but there's one night from my teenage years that I simply can't forget. I've tried to rationalize it. I've tried to explain to myself that it was just a coincidence, or that my mind played a trick on me. But every time I think about what happened, that same chill comes back. It happened in the summer of 2007. I was 15 years old, and I was spending a few days at my best friend Lauren's house. It was an old house, the kind with wooden floors that creak at night, and an attic full of things no one ever touched. We always liked to explore that attic because it seemed like each box had its own story. That night, it was me, Lauren, Beth, and Riley, and we decided to go up there to see if we could find anything interesting. It was Riley who pulled out a large, heavy box from one of the corners of the attic. It was covered with a thick layer of dust and seemed like it had been left there for years, if not decades. When we opened the box, we found a board game that looked old, with a vintage appearance, but well preserved. The wood was dark, and the design on the board was strange. Symbols I didn't recognize, but not something you'd find in any toy store. The first strange thing was that we had never seen that game before, and Lauren swore she had never touched that box. The second strange thing was that when we searched for it online, we found absolutely nothing about it. No similar images, no references. But we laughed it off and decided to play it anyway. After all, what could possibly go wrong? We took the game downstairs to Lauren's room, lit some candles because we thought it would make the experience more immersive, and set up the board. Inside there was a wooden die, some carved pieces, and a folded piece of paper with rules written by hand. Each player must roll the dice on their turn. The board will respond. That was it. No explanation on how to win or end the game. Beth went first. The die landed on the board and kept spinning for longer than it should have, like it was spinning by itself. When it finally stopped, it landed on the number 3. Nothing happened immediately, but then we heard a noise in the hallway, like someone had taken 3 heavy steps on the floor. We fell silent for a second, waiting to hear it again, but nothing. We laughed it off, saying it was just a house noise, and went on with the game. It was my turn. I rolled the dice, and it landed on the number 5. This time the window in the room opened by itself, even though it was locked. The wind blew out half the candles. We started to feel uncomfortable, but no one wanted to be the first to quit. "It's just a coincidence," Lauren said, then picked up the dice for her turn. When she rolled, it landed on the number 1. As soon as the die stopped, we heard the door creak open slowly, but no one was there. The hallway was dark, and it seemed bigger, like the space had stretched somehow. None of us moved. Riley suddenly stood up and said we should stop. "The game responds," Beth murmured, repeating the words from the note. I wanted to say something, but then we all saw it at the same time. Lauren's piece moved by itself. None of us touched it. It slid 1 square forward on the board as if an invisible hand had made the move. We stood completely still. "Is someone playing a prank on us?" Lauren asked, but her voice faltered at the end. Beth suddenly stood up and said that this wasn't normal, that we should stop the game. That's when we heard it, a dry click. The die, which had been lying still on the board, spun on its own. By itself. None of us touched it. It spun, rolled, and landed on the number 2. Then we heard footsteps, coming from the hallway, from the attic. 2 steps, loud. That was enough to make all of us run. We left the board, the candles, everything. We ran down the stairs, almost tripping, slammed the guest room door, and huddled in there, shaking. The house was silent now, but the feeling that something was there didn't go away. There was no sound anymore, but it felt like we were being watched. Each of our heartbeats echoed strangely, as if the house was absorbing every movement, every breath. We stayed awake the whole night. No one had the courage to go back up to get the board or close the window. When the morning came, we went up with more courage, or less fear maybe, and the game was still there, but the pieces had moved. They weren't where we had left them. Worse, there was an extra piece on the board, a piece that hadn't been there before. We had a strange feeling, like something had invaded the house, something that shouldn't be there. Lauren said she locked the game back up in the attic, but the next year, when we went to look for it, we couldn't find it. The box had simply disappeared. We never figured out where it came from, who put it there, or how it worked. And here's the strangest part. Sometimes, on the quietest nights, I catch myself wondering what would have happened if we had continued. If we had played one more round, or if we had followed the game to the end. But at the same time, I know I never want to know what would have happened. Because somehow I feel like the game is still there, waiting. To this day, when I think back on that night, I feel that same coldness creeping up my spine. The game wanted us to keep playing, and the worst part is, we almost did. My name is Brianna. I'm 28 years old, and I live in Denver, Colorado. I never really believed in those bizarre stories you read online. I always thought most of them were either inventions or exaggerations. But there's something that happened to me and my friends when I was 17, and to this day, whenever I think about it, I get this strange chill. We tried to forget it, tried to find a logical explanation, but every time I look at those photos, my stomach turns. So maybe sharing it here will help me deal with that weird feeling that hasn't left me since that day. That night, my friends and I decided to stay over at Katie's house, which was in a quieter neighborhood with wide, silent streets. It was her birthday, and her parents had traveled to visit her grandmother, so the house was all ours. There were 7 of us. Me, Katie, Lauren, Megan, Sophie, Emily, and Haley. We spent the night doing what any teenager does. Gossiping, making silly videos for Instagram, taking random personality tests, and of course, lots of photos. Lots of them. Katie's house had this old-fashioned vibe with heavy furniture and long hallways that seemed bigger at night. The kind of house that makes you feel uneasy at certain moments, but you can't exactly figure out why. We didn't mention it, though. We stayed in the living room most of the time, laughing and eating junk food. Between conversations, we'd snap selfies and group photos. The lighting was dim because we thought it made the stories look cooler. In some photos, we were all on the couch. Others were taken in the hallway, and some in Katie's bedroom, where we tried to do those spontaneous photos like we were in a professional photo shoot. Everything seemed normal, or so we thought. Around midnight, we went to the kitchen to make more popcorn when one of the girls, either Emily or Lauren, suggested we go up to the attic for a few more pictures. Just because it'll look cool and different, she said. The attic wasn't the most inviting place. It was dark, smelled musty, and the stairs creaked with every step. But, like always, we were up for anything fun. We went up there and started taking pictures of the old things covered in sheets. The sound of our laughter filled the space, but I had this strange feeling of being watched. You know? Like the room itself felt uncomfortable. But I ignored it. We laughed so much that nobody noticed the details. In one of the photos, taken right before we went back to the room, I saw that Katie was snapping a picture of us in the mirror. I was in the middle of the group, with Lauren beside me, and we were all laughing, like usual. But in the corner of the mirror, in the reflection, something caught my attention. Something was wrong. There was a figure, a girl with long hair, standing as if she was just watching. But none of us, not me nor the girls, noticed at that moment. I thought it was just a trick of the light, some kind of illusion the reflection had made. Then I got distracted and let it slide, and it turned into a joke between us. Katie is such a fan of horror movies, even the mirror gets freaked out, Lauren said at the time, and we laughed it off. What happened next was strange. The next morning, we all woke up late, of course, after all the laughs and stories. The first thing we did was check the photos, as always. When I saw the first picture from the night before, that strange feeling from before came back. The image from Katie's mirror photo reflected something different. Now, the girl wasn't just in the mirror reflection like before. She was standing behind us, staring straight at the camera. I felt a wave of discomfort. It was a feeling I couldn't explain, but it spread through me like a cold shiver. I asked if anyone else had noticed, and when we all looked closely, the others noticed too. Katie was already checking her phone, and the first thing she did was scroll through the photo, laughing, thinking it was just some camera glitch. She was the first to try to convince herself it was just a mistake. But the rest of us were as stunned as I was. Sophie, who was usually quieter, was the second to speak up. But who is that girl? I don't remember anyone with us last night. And then we started reviewing the photos. Each of us passed our phones around, trying to make sense of what was happening. And there she was, the girl with long hair, pale, with an empty expression. In every single picture. In some, she was near a window. In others, leaning against a wall. The worst part was that with every photo we looked at, the figure seemed more real. It didn't look like a camera malfunction. She was there, clear as day, with her long, messy hair, almost as if she was waiting to be noticed. And we couldn't ignore it anymore. Katie, in panic, tried to see if anyone from her family had come home, but that didn't make sense. Her parents wouldn't return until late afternoon, and like I mentioned, she was an only child. Yet, there she was, the girl. I started thinking of any explanation that could make sense. Maybe someone had sneaked into the house without us knowing, but what made me doubt this explanation was the lack of sound. None of us heard anything strange during the night. No footsteps, no doors or windows creaking open. I decided to look on my phone for something that could give me an answer. I went through social media and took a look at everyone's profiles. Suddenly, I noticed something that made me feel even more uncomfortable. In all the photos that had been posted the night before, that girl was in some of them too. Not just in our group photos, but also in Katie's solo shots, in the mirror reflection photos, and even in the short videos she'd taken. She was in every single one of them, across different cameras. We had never seen her, but she was there. After a lot of discussion, we decided to leave, but Katie stayed behind to clean up the house and, most importantly, try to understand what was going on. I never looked at her house the same way again. A week later, she called us and said she had moved to a different neighborhood for reasons she didn't want to share, and we never heard about the girl again. None of us could explain what had happened. No matter how hard we tried, nothing made sense. And the strangest part, after a while, the photos disappeared. I don't know how to explain it. They vanished from Katie's phone, from mine, from Lauren's, as if they had never existed. But what still creeps me out to this day, what doesn't let me sleep, is the fact that the photos we deleted didn't disappear from everywhere. Some of them were still somewhere. And the worst part, one day, Lauren sent me a photo she had found in her gallery. It was a photo of us, taken that night, and in that corner, near the mirror. She was gone. She had disappeared. And now, when I think about it, I get this feeling of emptiness. Like whatever happened that night was never fully resolved. Like what happened that night was never completely understood. My name is Yasmin. I'm 29 years old, and I live in Denver, Colorado. I've lived in this city since I was little, but the story I'm about to tell happened when I was 13 years old, on a summer afternoon, when things just got completely out of control in a way I never thought possible. I don't have a rational explanation for what happened, but what I lived through that afternoon still haunts me to this day. And that's what I want to share here, to see if anyone else has been through something similar. It was a normal day, almost boring. I was at Samantha's house, my best friend at the time. Her backyard was big, with a pool and several trees around it. We used to do everything out there, play soccer, chat, or just sit on the grass and listen to music. When the day started to cool down, we decided to play telephone. I remember that we always had fun with this game because the phrases got completely distorted by the time they reached the last person. We started the game normally. The game is pretty simple. One person whispers a phrase into another's ear, and it continues until the last person says out loud what they heard. I was in the middle of the line, and what I loved most was seeing how the phrases became funny after passing through everyone. We were laughing non-stop at first. The phrases were normal, like the dog chased the ball or the sky was full of clouds. Everyone was laughing, having fun until things started to get strange. It was when Emily passed the phrase to Amanda. I couldn't hear exactly what she whispered, but when Amanda passed it on to Laura, she had this strange expression on her face, like she was trying to understand what she had just heard. She looked at us, confused, and said, "The voice said something about the dark and the void, and about a door." We all went silent. It was impossible that someone had said that. We thought it was just a joke, a way to spice up the game. But the phrase was too strange to be a joke. We kept going, hoping the next person would just give a more common response, but that didn't happen. When the phrase reached the last person, Laura, she said aloud, "There's something here. Someone is watching." Those words hit us like a ton of bricks. I remember the chill down my spine and how the other girls started looking at each other, trying to figure out what had just happened. What scared me the most was that no one remembered saying those words. It wasn't part of the game. It was like it came out of nowhere. Then, things got even weirder. Laura, who was at the end of the line, turned to us and said, almost whispering, that she had seen someone right next to Samantha, whispering in her ear. Samantha looked at her with the most confused expression. She was so close to Laura, but she hadn't seen anyone. The weirdest thing was that Laura kept insisting, saying that the figure was right there, but no one else had seen anything. The atmosphere was getting heavy, and the game wasn't fun anymore. We were trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling that had taken over us, but we couldn't. Laura's words kept echoing in my mind. There's something here. I couldn't stop looking at the hallway of the house, where at the back there was a door leading to the inside. Something felt like it was there, watching us. Like it was watching us, but we couldn't see it. The strangest thing happened when, in the middle of all that tension, a faint sound started coming from inside the house. It wasn't exactly a voice, but it sounded like someone was whispering, and the sound was coming from a distant place, from inside. Each of us looked at each other, unsure of what to do. The feeling that something was wrong was undeniable. I felt a cold knot in my stomach, and the silence became deafening. Samantha, who was closest to the door of the hallway, looked at us and, in a nearly desperate tone, said, "I feel like someone is here, watching me." I wanted to laugh because I thought she was just trying to get into the spirit of the game, but the way she said it, so seriously, made my whole body freeze. Then the door to the hallway, which had been locked until that point, opened by itself. No one had touched the doorknob, yet the door slowly creaked open. The worst part was that no one, absolutely no one, was there. The house was empty, but I felt like someone was there, waiting for something. It was like they were watching us, but we couldn't see them. The door closed by itself shortly afterward, but none of us had the courage to go there and check what had happened. We all froze, as if just approaching it would be dangerous. As time passed, the game was forgotten, and all that was left was this deep sense of discomfort. The energy in the house seemed to have changed, like the whole environment had become heavier. None of us wanted to talk about what had happened, but we all knew that something strange had occurred. I couldn't stop looking at the hallway, where the door had moved by itself. I could feel a presence there, like someone was just waiting for the right moment to manifest. When the game ended and the girls went home, the tension was still there. I couldn't be alone, not even in my own house. I kept thinking about what I could have done differently, or if I could have avoided something. But what troubled me the most was the feeling that it had just begun. I didn't know if I was being paranoid, but the sense that something was watching us, like we weren't alone, didn't leave me in peace. And to this day, when I look at a dark hallway or hear an unexpected sound inside the house, that memory comes back with full force, and I wonder if it really happened, or if we just imagined it. My name is Kelly, I'm 29 years old, and I live in a small town in Pennsylvania. What I'm about to tell you happened when I was 15, but to this day, I still get chills every time I think about it. I was at my friend Emily's house on a warm summer night. We were finishing high school, and as usual, she had that huge house full of places to hide. That night, we decided to play hide and seek in the dark, something that sounded really fun at the time, but ended up becoming the scariest experience of my life. The idea of playing in the dark seemed perfect to make everything more exciting. We turned off the lights in the living room and spread out through the house, laughing and trying to hide as best as we could. I was always one of the best at the game, so I felt confident when it was my turn to hide. I curled up under her bed, making sure I was completely out of sight. I heard my friend's footsteps moving away as time passed, and the silence in the house made me more and more uneasy. It was very dark, but that didn't bother me. I was already used to her house and knew how to orient myself, even without being able to see anything. Minutes passed, and I started hearing some whispers, but they were so faint I thought it was just my imagination. Time seemed to drag on until suddenly I heard a sigh near me. That cold sensation down your spine you get when someone is closer than you expect. "I found you," I heard a soft voice whispering. My heart skipped a beat. I stayed still, waiting for someone to turn on the lights, but the worst was yet to come. When the lights finally came on, no one was there. I quickly stood up, looking around, but I didn't see anyone. I froze, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Maybe I had imagined it, I thought. But soon, Emily appeared on the other side of the room and asked me, with a smile on her face, "Who were you talking to?" Her expression was confused, but nothing compared to the fear I felt. I didn't know how to respond. I tried to laugh it off, but I couldn't stop thinking about how it didn't make any sense. The voice sounded like hers, but I knew I wasn't alone under the bed. Deep down, something told me that wasn't Emily I had heard. From that point on, I started to feel a presence in the house, as if something was watching us, but the worst was yet to come. The lights flickered intermittently, and a cold air began to take over the room, even though it was hot outside. We could no longer concentrate on the game. Everyone became strangely quiet. Emily looked at me in a strange way and said it was best if we stopped there. When we were about to leave the room, a shadow moved too quickly to be just our imagination. Something was wrong, very wrong, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep that night. Emily's house had always been one of the coziest places I knew, but that night, everything felt different. The sound of creaking wood, the heavy air, and the feeling that we were being watched. That place, which once felt safe and familiar, now felt like a prison of dread. When we went back to the living room, the other girls were staring at us with blank expressions. They were so quiet that it seemed like something had taken them over. Emily, once so lively, now had a distant look in her eyes, as if she was trying to remember something important but couldn't. The situation started to drag on into a sense of oppression, and all I wanted was to get out of there as quickly as possible. The atmosphere was strange, and every noise in the house seemed amplified, as if the sounds of the environment were closing in on us. Emily, noticing my discomfort, approached me and, in a trembling voice, said, "Are you feeling it too?" I knew she was talking about the strange feeling in the air, but I couldn't answer right away. It was like my throat was tight, not knowing how to express the fear that had overtaken me. Finally, the girls started to gather, looking at their watches as if they were counting the seconds to leave. Something told me that no one wanted to continue with the game, but no one knew how to end the night. Emily looked at the door, and then, with the strangest expression I've ever seen on her, said, "I think it's better if you leave now." I tried to protest, but she interrupted me, almost pleading for me to go. Her house, which once seemed like a welcoming place, now had a weight that made me feel like I was being pushed out. Her words sounded strange, as if something inside her had changed. I agreed, even though I didn't fully understand what was going on, and said my mom was waiting for me. I wanted to leave as fast as I could, without looking back, but when I left the room, I saw something that made me freeze in place. A shadow, a figure that didn't look human, moved down the hall. I couldn't make out the details, but enough to know it wasn't one of the girls. I closed my eyes, thinking it was just my mind playing tricks, but when I opened them again, the shadow was gone. I ran to the front door, feeling heavy footsteps behind me, but when I looked back, there was no one there. The feeling that something had followed us was inside me like an indelible mark. I knew we weren't alone that night, and a part of me feared that whatever had happened was more than just a coincidence. But the worst of all was the silence. The silence that lingered after I left the house, as if the very environment was absorbing the presence of something that shouldn't have been there. I never played hide and seek in the dark again. And Emily, well, she never told me anything about what happened that night. To this day, we still don't fully understand what that was. I don't know if it was just our imagination, if something was really there, or if I was simply too scared to see things clearly. But the feeling that we weren't alone in that house stayed with me to this day, and I still can't shake the idea that maybe what I saw that night wasn't just a game.